One of the most interesting things I've done over the last few years was fly to South America, purchase a vintage Volkswagen Kombi, turn it into a tiny home intended to be shared with over 100 hitchhikers, and proceed to drive north all the way until the road ran out. I thought it'd take about a year. It took almost 6. But what can I say? I had a lot of adventures on the way and more than a few problems. But none of those problems are bigger than what happened in the last 1,000 miles, and that is what we're getting into today. You might want to buckle up. This is one heck of a ride. We pick up the story somewhere near the top of the Alaska highway. At this point, I'd been driving to reach Alaska for about 4 years. So you can imagine what it felt like to turn the last corner and see this sign. Yep, pretty much like that. Man, I was smiling so hard my face was hurting, but that smile only lasted until the first town that we came to, where we had a catastrophic Kombi transmission failure. I mean, it was game over. We met this guy who invited us to stay with him, but then immediately put on a bear suit and started running up and down a river where a grizzly was feeding her cubs. What a nutter! We decided not to stay with the crazy and instead stayed with one of the nicest American families that we've ever met. I mean, Chad and Stacy really tried to help us out. And when they couldn't, they did a fine job of cheering us up and showing us a good old Alaskan adventure. Deadliest catch, eat your heart out. I got a fish! Did you know that mechanics are hard to come by in remote Alaska? I did. We were 1,000 miles short of our expedition finish line at the Arctic Ocean, and there was no way to fix our bus. We would be abandoning our tiny home on wheels to the harsh Alaskan winter. I said sorry and goodbye to our hitchhikers that I'd picked up, and with no public transport out of the town, I hitched a ride myself as a first-time crew member on a sailboat headed out of Alaska.
This is just unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and Leah came too. You guys remember Leah, right? For 2 months, Leah and I lived aboard that boat, learning how to sail, catching our dinner, and exploring the most remote parts of Alaska and Canada. This is off the beaten track. This is truly epic. Just like every time we go traveling, we found ourselves outside of our comfort zone, but learned new skills and experienced real growth. Sailing was definitely a highlight. Sure, it wasn't all sunshine and lollipops, and at one point we kind of got stuck in a whirlpool, but 2 great things came out of that adventure. 1, we managed to escape from rural Alaska, and 2, Leah and I began to sow the seed of a beautiful relationship. I'm telling you, man, she's a keeper. But I left her anyway and flew back to Britain to inquire about a US visa. I certainly love my island of Jersey, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to ask the US Embassy in London for permission to finish my expedition. But to my astonishment, America said no. You can't have a visa. You can't come back and get your Kombi. In fact, you can't come back to America at all. Somehow, out of the blue, I had found myself banned from the United States of America. Having actually done nothing wrong, and after many years of trying to reach the Arctic, that ticked me off. And it ticked off more than a few Kombi Live subscribers too. I love you guys. Next thing I knew, we were on the news. Governors, senators and congressmen had been petitioned on my behalf by our viewers, and then a miracle happened. The decision was overturned and I was granted a visa to return to the USA and finish my trip. That was a highlight. And of course, Leah still wanted to travel with me, so that was also a highlight. Unfortunately, at pretty much that exact moment that we were celebrating this major victory, our Kombi managed to spontaneously catch fire whilst it was parked in Alaska. Our home was destroyed. That was definitely not a highlight. This guy, Brett, who we'd never actually met before, stole the title of nicest American in the world and insisted on driving all the way from California to Alaska to help rescue our burnt out home. Like a phoenix from the flames, we rose again and dragged the Kombi out of Alaska and to the nearest big town of Whitehorse in the Yukon, where we proceeded to set up base camp in a borrowed tent and gut our home. As hardcore minimalists, we didn't really have a lot of possessions, and we lost almost all of what we did have in the fire anyway, including our bed, but the gods were smiling on us, and guess what? Just a quarter of a mile away we found an abandoned vintage Volkswagen with some donor parts. Yes please, and thank you very much. That will do nicely. For good measure, we took our engine apart for the 11th time on this road trip. Yay. And installed a new transmission to boot. In 3 weeks, with the help from this once stranger, now best friend Brett, we managed to completely restore the Kombi. It was better than ever. We were back on the road and finally headed north. We celebrated by drinking a cocktail with a real dead human toe in it. Then began driving north towards the Arctic, but broke down every 20 miles in some seriously remote places. But then we were rescued by these legends who found some tape in our gas tank. Onward we pushed to the end of the earth, driving many miles on some seriously challenging roads. We eventually reached the Arctic Circle and drove over the last mountain range in the world. We descended the other side to see the infamous tundra, a place that's so far north that not even trees can live. But mosquitoes, yeah, they can live. In fact, they bloody thrive. Oh man, it was a nightmare. Eventually we got to the end of the road, the ugliest town in America, Deadhorse, Alaska. We had driven so far north that the sun literally didn't set, but there was life still further north where the roads don't go, so we jumped onto a flight to a very remote island. Why the heck would you do that? Well, how else are you going to see how people live at the edge of the world? And of course it allowed us to swim in the Arctic Ocean. We hung out with Inupiat Eskimos in their summer shelters, witnessed firsthand how they process food to survive the winter,
Too cold for the freeze to death.
got to know the kids of the Arctic, tracked down some polar bears. Did I mention that we got to see polar bears? That was most definitely a highlight. We did promise that after our Alaskan adventure that we'd give away our Kombi to one of our subscribers, but our Alaskan adventure was not quite over yet, so we drove all the way south, stopping for an obligatory photo of the Into the Wild bus and a quick surf on the world famous Alaskan Boar Tide, a phenomenal single wave surf session which happens every day as the tide changes. Pretty cool, huh? Driving on the train tracks through Alaska's longest tunnel, we emerged in the town of Whittier and headed out to remote waters which sometimes made us feel like this, but mostly made us feel like this. These guys joined us on the journey, and this guy too, and we managed to catch enough food to see us through the next couple of weeks, which we spent on the Kenai Peninsula, and that was definitely one of the best places to explore in Alaska. We challenged ourselves to survive by finding our own food, and between the endless supply of gorgeous pink salmon and other fruits and vegetables that were just growing wild, we didn't starve. I mean, we were slightly concerned that we'd poisoned ourselves, but we were careful and we managed to live to tell that tale and many more, like that one time we met a family of 8 living in this incredible houseboat, or that time that we drove out to that remote abandoned mine, or maybe that time that we found that abandoned village store which doubled as a jail cell. And definitely don't forget that time that we went kayaking with a guy that we met in a coffee shop and discovered an ice cave in a glacier. That was one of the single most scary and awesome things that I have ever done.
This is unreal.
The seasons changed, the northern lights danced across our bedroom windows, and we unfortunately had to bring this epic adventure to a close, but there was still one last thing to do, to give away our adventure mobile, our home, our Kombi, to one of you guys. I mean, a promise is a promise. The Kombi was the only real possession that I owned in the world, never mind the fact that it was also my home. I'd been through a lot with this vehicle and it was definitely not an easy thing to do, but through a process of random selection, we found a subscriber who did indeed want our Kombi, and so we met him and handed over the keys. That left Leah and Alaska the dog homeless in a foreign country. From here, we must begin the search for our next home, the one that we will now drive around the world in an all-new Kombi Life travel series. That is as much as I can tell you because I don't know what's going to happen next. I do know that driving around the world is going to be extremely challenging and that we are going to literally have to invest years of our life into creating this series. None of us will be the same when it's said and done. I hope that we can tackle that journey together and that you will be there for the next adventure too. Until then, happy travels.